is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The coronavirus pandemic has contributed to a strong upsurge in the number of victims of hunger in the world. In countries such as Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso, the combination of violent conflict and the pandemic has led to a dramatic rise in the number of people living on the brink.
Now, in a difficult year of the COVID-19 pandemic, floods, swarms of locusts, and instability in some parts of the world, the UN World Food Programme, which provides life-saving food relief to millions across the world, won the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. But as the WFP marked this big achievement, challenges to the world's food security remain a stark and daily reality, particularly in Africa, where over 50% of the world's acutely food insecure people reside. Millions more on the continent are facing the same risk in the wake of recurrent and emerging challenges. So what are the interventions in mitigating hunger? And what are governments and relief agencies in Africa doing to find lasting solutions? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. According to the 2020 Global Report on Food Crisis, a joint report by the Global Network Against Food Crisis and the Food Security Information Network, 135 million people globally faced acute food insecurity in the past year. A majority of these people are in the global south, with 73 million people living in Africa, 43 million in the Middle East and Asia, and a further 18.5 million people distributed across Latin America and the Caribbean. Among the world's 10 worst food crises in the past year, 4 of them were experienced in African countries, with up to 61% of South Sudan's population facing food insecurity, down to Nigeria's 5% of its population. These percentages translate into millions of people going without food. The biggest driver of acute food insecurity in Africa is conflict, which has cast an estimated 37 million people into hunger. Climate shocks such as flooding and drought have put a further 26 million into hunger, while economic downturns in countries such as Zimbabwe and Sudan have put 10 million people into dire food crisis. Well, joining us to unpack Africa's food security situation is our panel of experts. Ross Smith is joining us via Zoom from Nairobi. He's the head of programs at the World Food Programme's Regional Bureau for Eastern Africa. Jasper Mwesigwa is also in Nairobi, joining us via Zoom. He's the regional food security analyst at the IGAD Climate Center. Lavinia Antonacci is a food security expert. She's joining us from the Food and Agricultural Organization's headquarters in Rome. Thank you all for joining us on the program. Now, every 5 years or so, this cycle is similar for Africa. A La Nina weather cycle brings in some drought, and then followed by flooding, which is what we are experiencing right now. Ross Smith, what is the current situation and what are its effects on agriculture and the food output for the continent?
Great, thanks very much, Beatrice. It's a good question. As you say, there are recurrent shocks and recurrent events. And in fact, they are happening with increased frequency year on year here. So at the moment, we have a triple threat across this region with a locust outbreak, with floods, and with anticipated drought and reduced harvest next year. And of course, on top of all of that is the COVID pandemic, which has had major economic impacts throughout the region. So, you know, some of the analysis we've done, we're anticipating an up to doubling of the number of people that are food insecure, certainly across the East Africa region. And that's a trend that's applicable more broadly across other regions in Africa and more globally.
So when you talk about a looming threat and you talk about the doubling of the food insecure people, Ross, break it down for us exactly. What is the short-term outlook for 2020 and exactly how many people are we talking about when you talk about the figures?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the new phenomena we've seen with COVID is really the new food insecure that are in urban areas. And this is often an area that's overlooked in a lot of the analytic work that we've done in the past and in a lot of the humanitarian and development work. Certainly in this region, I'm working in the East Africa region, but others as well. So in East Africa, I'll talk about some numbers here and then more globally. In East Africa, we're looking at moving from 25 million people that are acutely food insecure to up to 40 to 45 million people that are acutely food insecure. And a lot of those new food insecure are in urban areas. And of course, people that are affected by droughts are also often the same people affected by locusts and affected by floods. So it's a concern. Globally, we know that there are up to 2 billion people that are food insecure, and up to almost 700 million of those are in the Africa region itself. And some of those are more moderately food insecure and some are more acutely food insecure, of course. But to draw attention to this region, we have 4% of the world's population in Eastern Africa, but 20% of the world's acutely food insecure people.
All right, let's look at those numbers a little bit more, because Jasper, we are not talking about a new phenomena here. We've heard from Ross that it is a continuous cycle. This time around, though, was the cycle expected in terms of preparedness, and what's been the response?
So, IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center organizes seasonal regional forecast forums. We call them GACOF. And so far, the most recent GACOF indicated that the region is going to face below average rains. And in terms of food security, when we see below average rains, we know that's a poor season. Others may call it a drought season. And this is where we are heading. Now, we have seen in the past droughts, the case of 2010, 2011, 2016, 2017, we got over 20 million people in need of food assistance in our region due to those climatic shocks. Fortunately for this year, there has been consecutive good seasons in the past. So the pasture communities have got pastures, the cropping areas have got some food, but these gains are going to be reversed if we see a drought coming up at the end of this year. As of last month, end of September 2020, the IGAD countries had about 29.5 million people who are in need of food assistance. The majority of these were in Sudan, Ethiopia, and also South Sudan. Sudan and Ethiopia happen to be among the countries that when they face drought, the number of food insecure increases sharply. So if this happens, we will see a deterioration of food and nutrition security in the countries, especially those communities that depend on the October to December rains.
So if you look back at it, and we already know that there are below average rains forecasted, Jasper, what is the response to this? What is happening now?
So a number of early warning systems have issued alerts and warnings. As IGAD and a member of the FSNWG, FSNWG is a consortium of so many organizations, government, development partners, UN. It is co-chaired by IGAD and FAO. It released an alert last week indicating that the food security situation may deteriorate with the upcoming poor rains. We are hoping that this information is well received by the actors and the concerned governments, and they take action. We know that when governments and decision makers receive the right information, undoubtedly they make the right decision. So we are hoping that they are learning from the past, and this time they are going to act as soon as possible.
So as we wait for governments and agencies to act, Lavinia, there seems to be a disconnect here, because we are hearing about a staggering the staggering numbers coming out of Africa's food insecure. There is a disconnect because 60% of the world's arable land has been reported extensively to be in Africa. Yet FAO reports that at least 256 million people, about 20% of the continent, go hungry in Africa today. What is this disconnect? Why is there a disconnect?
So I would say that from a food security perspective, we don't need to look only at the availability part. I think there is a great concern in terms of access to food. And this is what we've been also looking when seeing the pandemic effects on the food security. And so, for example, all the restrictive measures that have been put in place to contain the spread of the virus, for instance, were also very much disrupting not only the agri-food systems, but causing major limitations in terms of food access. We've seen also, Ross was already mentioning that the urban population are mainly concerned in terms of losing their jobs. They are part of the informal sector, so they do face income shortcomings and lower purchasing power. So it's not a problem of availability of food. There is a problem of access and stability that we need to really, really take into consideration.
So we are seeing, a lot of challenges that have come up as a result of COVID-19, exacerbating the already tough situation when it comes to food security. And Ross, there are a lot of global and regional initiatives aimed at combating the food security around the world, not just in Africa. And WFP, your organization, did win the Nobel Peace Prize for 2020 for its effort to combat hunger. But there is still a lot of hunger in the world. What is it that your organization is grappling with as we speak? What is your biggest challenge, and how is your organization responding to that?
Thank you, Beatrice. It's a good question, and thanks for the mention of the Nobel Prize. Certainly, we're proud of that. But I mean, I think it's a shared prize. It's certainly WFP, but also all of our partners, FAO and IGAD, my fellow panelists, of course, and all of the people that we work with in national governments. And I think it draws attention to the fact that hunger is a key factor in peace, or the lack of peace, and it's a key contributor to reducing hunger. Ending hunger is a key contributor to peace. I think from our side, from WFP, and certainly when we reflect on the new normal around COVID and how we respond to COVID, there are really three key things. The first is as advocacy work that we are doing with our partners right now, very actively, to help national governments scale up their response. This is a range of different safety net and social protection measures to protect vulnerable households and the financing of that. And that's very, very important. And that's not something that can be done by any one agency or any one institution. The second is around the supply side. As Jasper had mentioned, there's really critical that we keep borders open, we keep the free flow of goods, and we allow the movement of essential commodities, and that will of course become very critical when we look at health commodities and potential vaccine deployment. So that's something we've been working very actively on with host governments across this region and globally as well. And then the third is the need to scale up. We all need to scale up. And as the number of food insecure and hungry grow, WFP is an imperative that we respond to that. So we're working at scaling up our own operations and finding the funding to that. And it's a major challenge that we face going into 2021.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment, but stay with us on the program because we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll further analyze Africa's food security in a moment.
Life moves pretty fast. Ideas move at the speed of sound. Technology moves at the speed of light. If you don't filter out the noise, you might miss the details. We pay attention to the details because they matter. Showing you a different perspective, See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Our panel of experts is still with us from Nairobi and Rome. Let's continue with this discussion now. Lavinia, I want to talk production because Africa's population is expected to double by 2050, meaning that the continent will need to feed an additional 1.1 billion people. Today's challenges, as we've mentioned in this program, is already magnified. Is food production, in terms of volumes, in terms of techniques, at the grassroots level, at the national levels, is that improving to meet with the demand of a growing population?
So this year, African production, so the outlook is actually reporting a good cereal production, particularly thanks to large maize output in Southern Africa, owing to, for instance, strong production recoveries in South Africa and Zambia, and good production prospects for East Africa, namely Sudan and United Republic of Tanzania and Kenya. However, we see that concerns still remain, especially because of the effects of the desert locust on rural livelihoods in parts of Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, despite large-scale control operations, let's say, that have prevented a more significant impact on crop production. However, again, I would really flag that the problem is also to the concerns in terms of access.
Ross, in terms of scaling up response to meet with the growing population, what are you witnessing at the local level particularly?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question is good, and as Lavinia said, there's a range of different projections for production this year, but we know that production in this region is really challenged. There are many smallholders that still rely on very traditional techniques, for example, for agricultural production. And so there is a need to address that, to help some of these smallholders become more productive. But I think the other challenge is how we make the food systems in this region more sustainable. And this is, East Africa, for example, but much of the continent is a net food importer. There isn't enough production to feed the existing population. You talked about the growing population, and that's a major concern across this region. We anticipate another 100 million people in East Africa within the next 20 years, and that's going to put major pressure on on food systems and on food security more generally. So, what we're talking about is looking at innovative ways to link local producers to local consumers to improve the availability of nutritious food for the population in general, especially urban populations that are often very vulnerable without that access. So, I mean, these are just some of the more immediate, I think, opportunities that we need to look at. And as we look at our emergency programs,
right,
what we're trying to do is design those in such a way that they help build the resilience of households so they can step out of an emergency sort of situation and move into a more productive life.
Because, Ross, that is really the key question, though. How do you address that question of unlocking those enablers? Are there specifics that have been put in place, though? Are there specifics that show signs of improvement?
Well, I think that there, and Jasper and others, that are working for some of the regional bodies here, as he indicated, there's some good strategies in place. There's some good set of policies in place, but we have chronic underinvestment in the food sector. We have chronic underinvestment in the agriculture sector and in the nutrition sector, for example. And I think that's one of the major enabling factors that we need to address. And that's investment by all. It's not just national governments, but it's all of us, all actors that are concerned at the moment. And that's a key thing. And then the other is sustained action over time. It cannot just be chasing emergency situations or humanitarian situations, but we need to be equally investing in the solutions for sustainability.
All right. Lavinia, have we seen, though, in the past, Lavinia, if I just come back there, have we seen in the past that a better economic growth translates into a better food security systems for the various countries or various continents?
Well, I would say not necessarily, because we really need to look at several aspects. And so we really need to make sure that there is an equitable growth and distribution of the benefits for everyone.
All right. So, Jasper, there seems to be a lot of, innovative ideas that IGAD has come up with to try and, help the continent meet its food deficiencies, though. But we are seeing, apart from COVID-19 this year, floods, locusts, drought, armyworms, other, issues keeping the African farmer struggling year in, year out. Why isn't innovation being adopted to assist the African farmer?
Well, most improved technologies, something like mechanization, irrigation, use of hybrid seeds, it's expensive. And the fact that majority of our farmers are small-scale farmers, these technologies may not be affordable. The second one is that our land tenure systems and policies may not support agricultural mechanization, agricultural transformation, and the use of technologies. For example, in highly populated areas of our region, you will find that most of the land the agricultural land is fragmented, small pieces. These will not support mechanization. But we also know that there are so many policies, like our colleague from WFP said, there are several policies, but these are not fully implemented. We have global policies, we have regional policies, we have continental policies, the CADIP initiative, the Agenda 2063 that specifies the Africa we want. All these have got innovative ideas, but these have not been fully implemented at national level, at community level. And we know that the capacities of governments and other actors to respond to most of the calls or be able to quickly respond to natural and man-made shocks to prevent these crises from happening, these capacities are still low. We have a continent that is made up of most of the countries are third world countries. So the capacity really to implement most of these very good innovations is low.
So Jasper, where is the challenge in terms of implementation? If there are so many ideas, where is the challenge for implementing?
Yes, so like I said, adopting technologies will require a lot of strength. You need resources to adopt improved technologies. So these resources are limited in most of our third world countries. The tenure systems in our countries are not supportive of this much needed agricultural transformation. The policies are there, but the resources to implement them are not adequate. And although we know that a food secure, developed, and self-sufficient Africa is possible, but these challenges will still limit us from achieving this intended goal.
All right, so we're going to wind up in a moment, but I want to get a final comment from you all, because we've had resources from Jasper. Resources is a very big issue in terms of achieving food self-sufficiency on the continent. And Ross, let me start off with you, because it's 10 years to go before the SDG goal of achieving zero hunger becomes fully attained by 2030. In terms of Africa's situation, what needs to be done? What are some of the solutions that can be put in place to assist the continent? And can Africa achieve self-sufficiency in food production?
A very challenging question. 10 years, the goal of 2030 is less than 10 years away, and it certainly is a very big challenge. I remain optimistic, partly because I think we have to remain optimistic, but it is going to take a certain course correction from where we are at the moment. And I do I do think it's worth talking about the opportunities that come out of COVID and the realization that we've all had from the impacts of COVID on the importance of the social sectors, the importance of the agriculture sector, and the importance of investing in these sectors. For much of the population at least in this region, in the East Africa region, but generally in sub-Saharan Africa, the agriculture policy is your social policy. And it's very important that we see increased investment there, increased awareness, and increased focus. That I would add that, but I would also say coordination is critical. There is, as Jasper mentioned, a very large, complex policy framework, but a real lack of implementation. And that implementation takes coordinated and concerted action and the political will to do it. So that's what I would list as the key priority.
Right, Lavinia, your thoughts?
I would like to highlight four also key items I think are very important to be mentioned, especially given that, what is the COVID-19 showing and bringing our attention to an already very precarious situation. So one, since the majority of vulnerable people rely on agriculture for their livelihoods, so this is triggering really a rethink of the functionality and resistance and resilience of agri-food systems under stress. Second, the importance to also reorganize the way crises are handled. And so, as already mentioned several times, important of alignment between humanitarian development and peace interventions, the importance of the role of the national governments in strengthening food systems and really breaking the silos. Third is scaling up social protection systems, including new vulnerable groups, but really preserving and protecting agricultural livelihoods. And then my final point, which I think now is even more important, is the importance of data and of monitoring the evolution of the food security situation, the needs and the understanding of vulnerabilities, and especially better linking the risk and predictive analysis to anticipatory action so that we can really avoid that the worst effects of such crises have so severe and long-term impacts on acute food insecurity.
All right. Jasper, you have the final word.
So my last take is on competing priorities. Our governments have a lot of priorities. I mean, they need to invest in education, in health, in infrastructure, in security, in so many things. And agriculture is just another priority. So for developing countries, it's a big challenge really to prioritize which areas they need to invest the little money they have. And that's why most governments have not improved on the budgeting for agriculture investments. And we can't blame them. They are trying to invest all the resources equitably across all the sectors, across all the competing priorities.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Very insightful discussion indeed. But that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. A big thank you to today's experts, Ross Smith, the head of program at the WFP's Regional Bureau for Eastern Africa, Jasper Batureini Mwesigwa, Regional Food Security Analyst at the IGAD Climate Center, and Lavinia Antonacci, a food security expert, joining us from FAO's headquarters in Rome. And thank you all for being here with us today. Remember to follow the conversation online through our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And be sure to catch the program again next week on Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team in Nairobi, it's goodbye.